Well, hello, and welcome to our online confirmation class. Today we're going to be talking about Elijah. Now, he is one of the greatest prophets of Israel. He did a lot of deeds of power. We hear his story in the first book of Kings. He shows up kind of out of nowhere. So remember, Saul was the first king, David was the second, Solomon was the third. And then after Solomon, the kingdom split in two. And so Elijah was a prophet of God that was sent to the northern kingdom, to the kingdom that had split away. And so now we're about 6, 7 kings into it. Some of these kings served for a long time, some didn't. Right now, there's this king named Ahab who is reigning over the northern tribes of Israel. And he's married to a woman named Jezebel. Now, you may have heard that name. It's never, if somebody calls you a Jezebel, it's not a good thing. It's got some negative connotations to it. And she was not really a good person. So she was able to convince Ahab to just forget about God. Forget about God and start worshiping all the old gods. Baal and Asherah are the two main ones. And so God sends Elijah to go talk to King Ahab. And he does. He goes there and he gives him a warning. He says, there's going to be drought here because of what you've done. And it's going to last for a number of years. And there's nothing you can do about it. And then he left and he went to a wadi, to like a marshy lake area, a slough. And he stayed there, and he was able to, during the time of the drought, he was able to drink the water of that slough. And God had told the ravens to bring him food. So he was fed by the ravens. Well, eventually the drought got so bad that the slough dried up. And so then God told Elijah to go over to the area of Sidon. And Zarephath, which is in Sidon. Now, we have a story of Jesus going there. Sidon was an enemy of Israel, of Judah. But the drought had extended that far too. And so he goes to this town, and there's a widow there, and she's collecting sticks because she's going to bake up the little bit of flour and oil that she has left. She's going to make a loaf of bread, and it'll be the last meal that she and her son will eat. And then she expects to die, both of them to die. Well, here comes Elijah. He just shows up and he says, can you give me something to eat? And she says, I don't have much. I was just going to bake the last of the little bit I had and eat it for our last meal. But she bakes some, and she gives some to Elijah. And Elijah stays with her, and while he's there, her flour sack never empties. Her oil pot is always full. They always have enough food to eat. At some point in there, for some reason, her son dies. And so Elijah goes and he prays over the son and he raises him from the dead. Like I said, Elijah did these he had a lot of power. He did these deeds of power. So the big story about Elijah, at least the one I want you to know, is that about few years into the drought, he goes back to King Ahab and he says, there will be rain. The rain will come again. And then he challenges him. Because during the drought, Queen Jezebel went hunting down all the prophets of God that were in the land of Israel. Except there was one guy, I forget his name. Maybe it was Obadiah. Yeah, Obadiah had hidden some away and was watching over him. But Elijah comes and he says to Ahab, call all the Israelites, bring them to Mount Carmel. And I want you to bring 400 prophets of Asherah and 450 prophets of Baal. Bring them there so we can see who has the power. Who is the real God? The God of Israel or the God of Baal? And so they come there and he tells them to build a bonfire. And he asks the people to bring 2 bulls so that they can each sacrifice a bull. And he lets the prophets of Baal choose first, and they choose their bull and they sacrifice it and place it on the wood. And Elijah says, now, the God that will accept this offering in fire is the real God. And so he tells the prophets of Baal, go ahead, call your God down. Let him start this pile of wood on fire. Let him burn up this offering of meat. Let us see the power of Baal. And so they start praying and they start dancing and they start, walking around the bonfire and they get going and then, they take their swords or their knives and they get little cuts in their arms as they're calling their God, and their God's not coming. Nothing's happening. After an hour or so of this, Elijah, he starts trash talking them. Is your God sleeping? What's he doing? Is he afraid to come? Are there too many people? Your God ain't got no game. Your God, nothing. And he's trash talking them. Finally, he says, enough's enough. And so he turns, and on Mount Carmel, there used to be an altar to God that was destroyed. So he rebuilds this altar with 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. And then he puts the wood on top of it. And then he sacrifices the bull and puts the bull on top of it. And then he has people douse it with water. Not 1 time, not 2 times, but 3 times. The wood is completely soaked. He had dug a trench around the altar. The trench is full of water. And then he prays. He prays to God, asking God to come and show his power. And God did. There was a flash of lightning come down from heaven, and the wood just started on fire. And in fact, it was so hot, it just burnt right up. The stones cracked in the heat. The water all evaporated. And he was able to turn to the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and especially to the people of Israel, and said, see the power of your God, the God of your ancestors. And so then he took these prophets of Baal and Asherah, and he had them put to death, killed them all, because they were prophets of a false god. the other story that we have is a continuation of this. Jezebel is mad now. She wants Elijah's head. So Elijah, not only being a prophet of God who speaks the truth, speaks God's truth, he also was smart enough to get out of there. And he went and he hid away, and an angel of God found him sleeping underneath a tree, actually, and said, "Get up and eat." So Elijah got up and ate, fell back asleep. The angel kicks him awake again, says, "Get up and eat." So he eats, and then he sends him to Mount Horeb. And he gets to Mount Horeb, the Mount of God, and God says, "I will meet you there." So Elijah gets there, and there's a cave that he enters. And he's in this cave, and this huge wind comes up, and it's such a strong wind, tornado. It's cracking rocks. It's making all kinds of noise and damage. And Elijah stays in the cave because God was not in that wind. And then there was a big storm came up with a lot of thunder and lightning and rain. And Elijah stayed in the cave because God was not in the thunder and the lightning. He was not in the storm. And after the storm, it was quiet. You know how quiet it can be after a storm. It's in that quiet that Elijah came out because he heard the quiet, still voice of God. God has power. God has a lot of power. God can do a lot of things. But I think a lot of time, most often, we find him in the quiet. When we can calm ourselves down, when we can settle down, and we can pay attention, and we can hear the voice of God. Like I said, Elijah is the greatest of all the prophets. When it was about time for him to leave, for him to die, he recruited an apprentice called Elisha. Names are very similar. And then one day he put his coat, took his mantle off, the mantle, that he's the lead prophet of God. He puts it on Elisha's shoulder. And Elisha follows him, just saying, "Don't go, don't go, don't go." And he saw a chariot of fire come down from heaven. And horses of fire kind of went between the two of them and nudged Elisha away. And Elijah was picked up and he was carried off into heaven. Next time we see Elijah is when he's talking to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. But Elijah holds a special place in the people of Israel, in the Jewish faith. At their feasts, when they set the table, there is always a plate set for Elijah in case he's come back. Because they always say Elijah is going to come. And when Elijah comes, they know that the Messiah is coming soon after. Well, as Christians, we say Elijah did come. Came in the person of John the Baptist, who came out of the wilderness, preaching repentance, preparing a way for the Lord, preparing the people to be ready for Jesus. And Jesus is the Messiah, the anointed one of God. But for the people of the Jewish faith, they are still waiting. And so that place is still set, and it still sits there empty as they wait. Elijah does a lot of things. Elisha does a lot of things. There's some fun stories about Elisha too that you find in the two books 1 and 2 of Kings. So I urge you to read them. But hopefully, next week we can meet in person. It's all I have for you on Elijah. Just kind of introducing you to this greatest of all prophets. Hopefully next week we meet in person. But until then, have a blessed week.